Alrighty, looks like we are live. So I'm going to start with this. Trust yourself. Break some rules. Don't be afraid to fail. Ignore the naysayers and work like hell to give something back. That, my friends, is a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Arnie himself. And I reckon that quote is a perfect way for property investors to understand what's going on right now. Because you know what? The rules, they've changed. The market's changed. This budget, my friends, has changed the conversation. Lending has changed. And here's the thing. Holding costs have changed. And a lot of the old advice investors were told to follow for decades is starting to look really tired. Traditional investors was already struggling. It was already kind of dead, in my opinion, right? And after the budget announcement, I think that's been buried. And I don't say that to scare anyone. I say it because I think we need to have an honest conversation, right? For years, investors were told to, buy, hold, and pray a normal house, rent it out, tip their own money in every month, claim a bit of back on tax, and wait 20 years for the market to hopefully do the heavy lifting. And you know what? In the most part, it has, right? That worked for some people in a very different market. But today, if your property needs a perfect condition to survive, it's going to create some stress. Because if it only works when the rates are low, it's going to create stress. If it relies on tax settings that staying exactly the same, it's going to create stress. So today, we're going to be talking about resilience. We're talking about cash flow positive property. That's right. I bought the shirt, right? Cash flow. We're talking about what a strong deal actually looks like right now. So we're talking about what, looking at dual key properties, SMS friendly and co-living properties, even SDA, specialist disability accommodation properties, which is why I genuinely believe good deals are starting to come back in the market for the right investor. And stay with me, because in a few days' time, we're also going to be sharing something that we've been building behind the scenes, right? It's designed for investors who want a more guided way to access high cash flow properties across Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, and more. And I'll share with you a little bit more as we go. Now, for those that are new here, my name is Gaurav Gupta, CEO and founder of Ethical Property Investments. We help everyday Aussies, people just like you, invest in high cash flow properties that both do good and make money. That means properties that are built around a genuine housing demand, stronger income, better structure, and a more practical path towards financial freedom. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's talk about what still works in property. Now, before we get started, what are we drinking today? We have passion fruit smash. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. So it's a sour beer. I believe beers are better sour than bitter. You know what? That might be confronting to some, but I believe sour beers are better than bitter beers. You mark my words on that one. Oh, delicious as always. So let's put it in the beer coaster, because we will be drinking this on a regular basis. So once again, do good, make money. I'm fully branded today, right? So the first thing I want to talk about today is resilience. A lot of investors are asking, what are the government going to do next? Will rates come down? Should I wait till things feel safer? And you know what? I get it. I understand that, right? When the rules change, people have this tendency to freeze. But resilient investors, they don't build their future around perfect timing. You see, they build their assets around things that can handle imperfect conditions, because a resilient property, that's the kind of property that gives you breathing room, right? It gives you income, it gives you options. And when the market gets tough, you're not forced into panic decisions because the property actually carries more of its own weight. And that, my friends, is where positive cash flow becomes really important, right? Because when the money starts coming in every week, you start to think differently, right? You don't wake up every month wondering how much more money you need to tip in. You don't need to watch every single rate announcement or with the same anxiety, right? You don't need to feel trapped waiting for the capital growth to save you. You know what? We've seen these tax changes. We've seen lending change. We've seen insurances rise. We've seen construction costs move. And we've seen more pressure around self-managed super funds and residential property. And I don't think that's the last time investors face policy changes. So the real question is this, my friends. How do you build a portfolio that can handle change? For me, this is an all-weather portfolio. A portfolio with enough income to keep you calm, enough structure built in the right strategy to give you choices. Repeat after me, choices. That's what financial freedom gets you, right? That doesn't happen by accident. It comes by proper asset selections, due diligence, tenant demand, location, lending, and proper property management. That's why we spend so much time talking about co-living and STA, dual key, and other high cash flow strategies. Because the old model of buying anything and hoping that the market sorts it out later is really getting harder to justify. So I want you to imagine two investors for a moment. One owns a standard rental that costs them money every single month, and the other, they own a cash flow positive property with stronger income, the same economy, same rates. They also need the same headlines when they check the news, but emotionally, they're living in two very different worlds. One investor's wondering, how long can I hold this? And the other's asking, hey, what can I buy next? That, my friends, is the difference resilience creates. And that's where Arnold's quotes comes back in. Trust yourself, break some rules, ignore the naysayers, work like hell, and give something back. I mean, I could not have thought of a perfect quote that's good for do good and make money. Arnie, thank you for that quote, right? That, my friends, is the spirit of ethical property investing. Make strong commercial decisions through assets that serve real housing needs. And that brings us to the next question. What does resilient property actually look like, right? A property can look beautiful and still be a weak investment. Nice facade, nice kitchen, good photos, but if the income's really thin, the holding costs are heavy, and the tenant demand is soft, you know what? That property's going to become a burden so quick. And I know you've seen some of these, right? You might have been offered to invest in some of these too, right? Actually, you may not like to hear it, but some of you might have invested in some of these. You know what? A resilient property starts with cash flow. And that income needs to be supported by genuine demand, sensible design, compliance, lending suitability, and of course, property management. Cash flow is part of that risk management too, right? A lot of people treat cash flow like the reward, but in this market, cash flow is also the buffer. What a concept, right? It helps you protect you from rate changes. It helps protect you from these rising costs. And it gives you a chance. It gives you a chance to hold the asset long enough for long-term wealth to actually show up. Many investors, they don't struggle because the property market never grows. They realize that they struggle because they can't hold a property for long enough. And that shortfall, it gets too painful because you know what happens in the middle? Life happens. Rates move. Bills go up. The long-term plan turns into a forced sale. And that's why positive cash flow is such a serious part of the conversation. And you know what? At Ethical Property Investments, most people know us for co-living and STA. When they're done properly, these properties, they can produce strong income while helping solve real housing problems. Because there's too many right now. There's too many houses being built in regional areas. We've only been building in metro area where we know there's going to be consistent demand because we're building for tomorrow, not just for today, not just what looks good on a nice brochure with a nice yield around it. Our co-living and STA properties, they can generate between $78,000 to $250,000 a year with yields of 8 to 18%. And 8 to 18% yield isn't high enough for you. I don't know what will be. Look, obviously it depends on the property, the location, the structure, the funding, and final outcome. That, my friends, is a very different conversation to a standard rental, which means it's $600 to $700 a week, while the owner keeps covering the gap. And you know what? I'm going to take a step back to some of this rooming house stuff that I'm seeing out there. I'm seeing some rooming houses. This is my warning sign to you. If you're seeing an area which is regional and has a rooming house attached to it, you might want to double think it because I'm seeing a lot go up in regional. I'm putting up my red flag, and I'm not seeing enough in metro areas where people actually want to live, right? But here's the thing, right? Co-living and STA aren't the only options. Some investors, they want stronger cash flow, but they might not be ready for STA. They might want something simpler than even co-living, right? They may have a particular lending structure or particular investment preferences. And that's where dual key comes in. Some of you are like, Goro, what's a dual key property? I've heard all about it, but I don't know what it is. Well, a dual key property is one property with two separate living spaces, usually under the one title, especially I'm talking about the Queensland version of dual key, not the New South Wales version, right? So if you've got one side with the 3 bedrooms, another side with 2 bedrooms, each side, they can be rented separately. So instead of one tenant and one income stream, you've got 2 rental incomes coming from one property. That gives you stronger cash flow than a standard rental property and more resilience if one side becomes vacant. So here's a real example of property we've got right now on our books that our clients have got exclusive access to. It's in Belwood Park in Southeast Queensland in the Brisbane region. The price is 1.061. Configurations, 2 beds on one side with 2 bathrooms, plus 2 bedrooms on the other side with 1 bathroom, plus 2 car spaces. The rental appraisal is $700 a week on one side and $600 a week on other. Now put them together, that's $1,300 a week. That's $67,000 a year for a property that's only $1 million. Now, does that automatically make sure it's right for every investor? Of course it's not, right? That's 6.7% yield, by the way, right? So you still need to look at lendings, outgoing depreciation, tenant demand, and the full cash flow position after costs. But this shows why asset selection is so important. Let me give you a real example. We have a client who had absolutely zero background in property investing before coming to us. Most of his investing experience was actually in crypto. 2 years after his purchasing his first dual key property through us, actually a year and a half after purchasing his first dual key property through us, that property had grown by $200,000 in equity, right? Today, his portfolio generates over $70,000 a year, and he's on track to purchase another property to really bring him into this financial freedom. So look, I'm not saying those are abnormal results. Those are normal results with us, right? Because that's what can happen when you combine the right strategy with the right asset selection. And guess what? That was probably our lowest income property. And you know what? We told him he'd get about $1,200 a week. He ended up getting about $1,350 a week rent. And you know what? The standard rental gives you one income stream. A dual key can give you two. Co-living can give you 5, even up to 9 multiple room income streams, right? SCA can give you a very different income profile, again, provided it's done properly with the right participants and the right provider relationships, and more importantly, the right location. That, my friends, is what resilient property looks like. Structure, numbers, demand, management, strategy. That is the right property for the right investor, because there's no single strategy that suits everyone, right? Some people are good for co-living. Some people are good at STA. Some people, they should look at dual key. Some, they need to fix their financial position first. Some just need good quality properties in good areas that are higher yield than the average property around them, right? So some might be able to use this thing called self-managed super fund before the government passes the restriction by the 10th of August. Some should not. This is why the right team and mentor are so important, because a good team should help you slow down when needed, move when it makes sense, and avoid the mistakes that could cost you years. So if resilience starts with cash flow, the next question is simple. Where are the good opportunities right now? Well, this is where it gets interesting. And I need to have a beer. A lot of investors right now, they're hesitating, right? Straight talk. They're reading the budget headlines, they're reading Sky News, they're waiting for interest rates to settle, they're worried about policy, they're wondering about whether properties become too damn hard. And because many people are sitting on the fence, good opportunities, they're starting to appear again for prepared investors. Now, I've got to be really clear. This doesn't mean that every deal is good. There's still plenty of rubbish out there. There's still properties being dressed up with these fancy brochures, but with really weak fundamentals. And there's still deals where the numbers only look good if half the costs are ignored. But when a market gets nervous, prepared investors can sometimes access better opportunities than they could when everyone was rushing in. That's what I'm seeing right now. More conversations, more availability, more vendors becoming realistic, and more room to really assess property. Now, I want to connect this back to self-managed super fund, because we spoke about this last week. If you're considering investing in a property through your self-managed super fund, you do not have the luxury of waiting forever. The federal government's been moving towards restricting. Hey, they haven't just been moving towards, they've restricted it from allowing borrowing to purchase residential property. You need proper SMSF advice, legal advice, and lending before doing anything. Do not take this live stream as personal financial advice. But the bigger point is simple. Policy risk is real. Rules can change. And if you've been thinking about using your super to invest in residential property, sitting on the fence could mean fewer options later. Last week, we actually spoke about this in detail, because the old habit is to wait until everything feels certain. But you see, certainty, that can be expensive. By the time everyone feels safe, though, that opportunity is probably already moved. So let me show you what type of property opportunities we're really talking about. So we have SMSF-friendly co-living examples at around 1.16 mil for a double-story 6-bedroom house, full turnkey, and it's already got residents living in there, right? That's, and then we all have other examples that, around 1.2 mil, full turnkey with income potential of up to $180,000 a year. Now, that particular one's an SDA specialist asset class. It's not right for everyone. It needs the right location, design, and compliance, which this property's already built and it's already got tenants in there, right? So this is what we're talking about. It can create Powerful income while helping people house people for those that need housing, right? That's where our do good and make money philosophy comes from, right? This money has to make sense. There you go. You can see that on the camera now. The money we invest in has to make sense, right? The human outcome has to make sense too. And for self-managed super investors, this can become especially important now because retirement planning is about income, control, and long-term security. A cash flow positive SMSF property can create a very different retire conversation compared with an asset that drains your fund every year. But the deal alone isn't good enough. Good deals start with the right team. You need someone looking at the location, someone looking at tenant demand, build qualities, provider suitability, finance. There's a few things to look at it, right? And someone that's willing to tell you when a deal's not right for you. That last part's really important. A good mentor shouldn't just tell you whatever's available. They should help you buy what fits. Because if the property's wrong, the problem becomes yours, right? If the structure's wrong, the problem becomes yours. If the management weak, the problem becomes yours. The opportunity in the market is real, but it rewards investors who choose to come to it prepared. And one of the reasons that people hesitate is because properties become really complicated. Finance is complicated, strategy is complicated, compliance is complicated. Choose the right asset is complicated, and it becomes a damn complicated situation. So we've been asking ourselves a very honest question lately, right? How do we make this simpler and more useful for investors who want financial freedom through property, right? And I know I've been going for a while. I'm in 16 minutes. So if you're watching, thank you. Come say hi. I'm watching you guys on the chat box right here. So make sure you drop me a line and say hi. Tell me what you're up to and tell me what your questions are. So I've spoken to hundreds of investors over the years, and we've been in this space, right? We found out that, getting messages from wifey. It's a live session. Does she not know? No, just kidding. Look, I've been speaking to 100 investors over the years in this space, and we found out that a lot of people don't need more information, right? They need a clearer path because most investors, they're already overwhelmed. They've watched the videos, they've downloaded the guides, they've spoken to brokers, they've looked at all the listings. They've had 5 different opinions from 5 different people at 5 different freaking barbecues. And after all that, they still don't know what to buy. That's why we ran the recent TLDR webinar. The whole point was to take a big topic and make it useful in 30 minutes. Now, I've got to admit, I took 40 minutes, but we focused it on how investors can build serious property cash flow without buying another standard rental. We covered co-living, SDA. We even covered our mortgage term and how you can pay your home loan off in 7 years or less. And we also give people free access to a wealth building tool that I created called a cash flow calculator. That's right, cash flow calculator, right? And in less than 5 minutes, that tool really helps calculate your wealth and show you the type of cash flow pathway that might be needed to get there. Because a lot of people, they say this thing, right? I want financial freedom, but they don't know what the number is. They don't know how far they are from their goal. They don't know how much passive income they actually need. And they don't know whether one property is enough, whether they need 2, or they need a whole different strategy altogether. Until that number is clear, the whole thing stays vague. That's where people get stuck, right? People, my guess, my hallucination is that you want progress. But a lot of people don't have a practical map. That cash flow calculator helps start the conversation. It helps you see the gap between where you are now to where you want to be. And once you see that gap, you can choose to make better decisions. Do I need co-living? Do I need SDA? Could dual key work? Should I improve my borrowing first? Should I reduce bad debt? Should I build income first and then growth? Those are questions that shape real investing decisions. And that's why we've been building something bigger. Because after more than a decade in property, I've made peace with one uncomfortable truth. And that most investors are sold a dream that maybe pays off in 20 years. And if the market's kind, if the rules don't change, if they can hold on long enough, the federal budget showed us how fragile that plan can be. And I got tired of waiting for good people to bet their future on someday. So we built something. Now, I'm not going to go through everything today. That's coming on Monday. You got to have to tune in on Monday, similar time. But I will say this. It's been designed for investors who want a more guided pathway into high cash flow property. It's selective. It's hands-on. It's focused on positive cash flow from real property opportunities across Victoria, Queensland, South Australia. It's built around making the processes easier for people who want income-producing property without trying to figure out every part alone. Because high cash flow investing, right, has a lot of moving parts, right? We're talking about buying the right property, checking the right area, understanding the rent, understanding the bill, understanding the right tenant, understanding the risks, the finance, the management, understanding when the whole thing actually fits your damn goals. And I could go on for hours. That's a lot for one investor to carry alone. So what we've been building is a better investing experience, more supported, more practical, more guided, more like a concierge. And the reason why we're doing this now is because the market is changing fast. Some investors, they sit back and they wait for everything to feel comfortable again. Others, they're going to use this period to secure stronger assets, make better income, and a more resilient position. And I heard this from Tony Robbins, right? So I was at a Tony Robbins event, and he said, do you know when the biggest companies we know now in America are created? They were created during the Great Reset, they were created during the Great Depression, right? In the winter. And we might be in a winter period, right? So right now, those that build their assets, pass them on for life. And I was saying this 3-4 years ago that, hey, build your asset base now before things grow, when it's going to be harder to pass on to your children. And that's exactly what's happening. So honestly, build these assets now. It's going to be a challenge if you wait too much longer. So if that sounds like you, keep an eye on Monday, because we're going to show you what we built. And I genuinely believe it's going to help a lot of people who want to build financial freedom through property without feeling like they're doing it all by themselves. So let's bring it together. Today, we spoke about resilience. The market's changed, but the opportunity itself, it hasn't disappeared. The investors who do well from here, they're going to choose more carefully, understand the numbers, build it around income, resilience, and proper guidance. That, my friends, is what we help people do at Ethical Property Investments. Now, before we wrap up, I've got one small favor. A lot of you watch these live streams, but you haven't followed Ethical Property Investments on Facebook and Instagram, which is where we share a lot of things, right? Now, if that's you, you're probably missing a lot of the guidance we share during the week. We post regular content around property investing, cash flow positive strategies, co-living, STA, and SMSF updates, right? Things that you need to understand before making the big decision. So if you've gone from watching the sidelines, follow Ethical Property Investments on Facebook and Insta. That way, you get to stay in the loop. You get the updates, you get the examples, you see what's changing in the market, and you get to see what we're going to be sharing on Monday. Because if you're building positive cash flow through property and you believe that's part of your future, this is the kind of information you want showing up in your feed before your next move. Thanks for joining me on Property Zoom Viewers. My name is Gaurav Gupta, and as always, do good, make money, and I will see you guys on Monday.